I went to dinner with my children that Saturday, at the same restaurant we used to go to for family birthdays, on special dates, and that now was just a desperate attempt to create a good memory after a week full of tension. I was trying to keep up appearances, smiling at them as they looked through the menu, when my gaze was drawn to a movement at the next table. The first thing I recognized was the low, familiar voice, accompanied by a restrained, nervous laugh. Then, her hand resting on the table, her nails painted the same color I had complimented her on days before. She was wearing the dress I had bought for our wedding anniversary last year. Across the table, a man, older than me, but with a smug look, as if he had won something, was touching her hand intimately. It was her boss. And it wasn't just any dinner. It was a date. A date between two adults who knew exactly what they were doing. And there I was, with our little kid smiling between bites of French fries, as if nothing was happening, as if the ground beneath me wasn't cracking every second. I told them both to go to the car. They didn't quite understand, but they obeyed. I didn't want them to see. I didn't want that image to stick in their memories like it stuck in mine. I walked over to their table and didn't change my mind, not because it was cold, but because there was nothing left to save. I looked her in the eyes and said everything I needed to, with the calm of someone who had already accepted the loss. I said that if she didn't want to be with me anymore, all she had to do was say so, but now, the one who didn't want me anymore was me. That the divorce letter would arrive at her house. And I left. I left without waiting for an answer, without waiting for an excuse, because any explanation would just be another stab in the wound that was still bleeding. That same night, while she still hadn't come home, while silence filled the void she left, I packed up every photo, every piece of clothing, every memory that still insisted on inhabiting that space. I put everything in boxes, without anger, just with a coldness that frightened me. My children slept, innocent, at my mother's house. And I stood there, staring into space, trying to understand when it was that I lost my wife. Maybe it was little by little, in small actions, in the excuses for arriving late, in the times she wouldn't look me in the eye during dinner. Maybe it was that very night, with her laughing at something the boss said, while the world fell apart around us. When she finally arrived, late that night, I found her face pale and her eyes wide as she realized the children's rooms were empty. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just told her she wouldn't see them that night, maybe not for a while. Panic spread across her face, and that's when I realized, she hadn't prepared herself to lose. She had prepared herself to lie, to carry on an affair, to perhaps keep both worlds running at the same time, but never to deal with the real consequences of her own choice. I went to sleep alone that night, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. In the days that followed, she tried to justify it, tried to say that she was confused, that it was a mistake, that it was neediness, that she still loved me. She said that what happened with the boss meant nothing, that it was an impulse, a moment of weakness. I listened in silence, as if I were listening to a foreign language. Because it wasn't about what she said, but about what she had destroyed. The trust. The home. The family. The looks on our children's faces, who were already beginning to realize that something had been broken forever. She begged for joint custody, tried to manipulate what was left of me with sweet words that sounded bitter. But there was no more room for that. Justice was served. Custody remained with me. And for the first time, she found herself without the role of a present mother, without the routine of school, breakfasts, family movie nights. All for one night, for a touch of emotion that she thought she needed. The strangest thing is that the more she begged, the more distant I felt. Because it wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about the kind of love that can't be recovered. And in this process of rebuilding, I ended up meeting someone without wanting to. A discreet, generous woman, with a smile that didn't need an explanation. It didn't happen quickly. It happened little by little. In long conversations, silent exchanges, in small gestures. I wasn't looking for anyone, but she appeared, as if the universe was reminding me that there was still something good in store for me. Meanwhile, my ex-wife was drowning in regret. She tried to get closer to her children, but they had already learned to distrust her. She tried to go back to painting, cooking, being the person she once was. But it was too late. The boss? He fired her a few days later, saying that it couldn't be leaked, that his image was at stake, that it was all fun until it stopped being convenient. And she was left alone. Alone with the weight of her choices. With her eyes full of longing for a life she could no longer have. With the phone that didn't ring. With the cold nights and the unanswered messages from her children. Her pain turned to anger. To despair. But I was no longer willing to absorb that. Because now, I was living something new. Something simple. Something that didn't make me doubt my own sanity. And the children? They laughed again. They slept peacefully. They hugged me tightly when I left for school. And every night I was grateful that I hadn't begged for someone who didn't want to stay. Years of marriage and dedication undone in one night. But also years of waiting and silence that now gave way to a new journey. Pain turned into learning. Betrayal turned into freedom. And what seemed like the end was actually a new beginning that I didn't know I needed. But what must she have felt when she saw the photo of her children with the new woman by my side, smiling in a park on a random Sunday, wearing the same clothes she once bought for them? Was her regret enough? Did she finally understand the value of everything she lost? Or is she still waiting for a phone call that will never come? Welcome to our channel. Here, no form of cheating is romanticized or supported. The stories you will hear are completely fictional, but they realistically portray how infidelity can destroy lives, families, and souls. Our goal is to make it clear, those who cheat lose much more than they imagine. Prepare yourself. You are about to hear a shocking story. Daniel was a calm man who rarely raised his voice or lost control when faced with difficulties. From an early age, he learned to see value in the little things, a family dinner after a tiring day, the spontaneous smile of his children when he picked them up from school, the discreet touch of his wife when she passed him in the kitchen. He was not an extraordinary man in the eyes of the world, but he was the kind of man who made a point of being present, listening attentively and building a life based on respect and consistency. Married to Helena for 13 years, their relationship was seen by many as stable, calm, without great turmoil or dazzling events, but with an apparently solid foundation. They had 2 children, Lucas and Elisa, aged 8 and 6, and the house they lived in was spacious, with a backyard where Daniel spent the weekends washing the car or assembling new toys for the children. Helena, on the other hand, was more intense than her husband. He had a sensitive nature, controlled vanity, and a certain sparkle in his eyes that effortlessly caught attention. She worked as a project coordinator at an architecture firm and was often praised for her creativity and keen aesthetic sense. Her day-to-day life was filled with meetings, tight deadlines and presentations to demanding clients. Unlike Daniel, who valued routine and predictability, she nurtured a constant need for renewal, challenges and new stimuli. Even so, there was a kind of silent pact between the two, a tacit commitment to continue building the family they had started with such zeal. The family's days unfolded in a certain harmony. In the morning, Daniel would prepare coffee while Helena organized the children's backpacks. Then, he would take Lucas and Elisa to school before heading to the office where he worked as a systems analyst. The afternoons usually passed at a leisurely pace, and in the evening, everyone would gather in the living room for dinner together. Their conversations were light, centered on school, cartoons, or the difficulties of balancing work and home life. On the weekends, they would often go out for lunch or visit Helena's parents, who lived in a nearby neighborhood. When they could, they would travel to Daniel's family's country house, where the children could run free on the lawn and the two of them could breathe away from the constant noise of the city. Over time, however, Helena began to show signs of emotional fatigue. She didn't say it openly, but it was noticeable in her longer silences, in the way she would turn her eyes off during conversations, as if she were thinking about something else. Daniel, always attentive to details, noticed the change, but believed it was just a phase. He started to prepare coffee with more affection, pick up the children earlier so that she could have time for herself, and even started planning a short trip for the two of them, something they hadn't done in years. He tried to get closer with discreet gestures, believing that true love is shown precisely in these small acts, in the silent care that doesn't need to be announced. Helena, on the other hand, was dealing with an internal avalanche. At 38, she felt torn between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Motherhood had left scars that she tried to hide, marriage made her feel trapped in the stability she once desired, and her daily life with Daniel, although full of respect and kindness, no longer filled her with the same intensity. She didn't blame him for this, nor herself. It was as if something inside her had slowly cooled, until the warmth became just a memory. The desire to talk diminished, the couple's intimacy became mechanical, and long nights with her eyes open became frequent. Still, she continued there, taking her children to school, packing their lunch boxes with encouraging notes, maintaining the facade of a complete woman while inside she felt incomplete and in constant conflict. Daniel was no stranger to this distance. He felt her absence in the hugs that no longer came as often, in the absence of kisses that used to be spontaneous. He tried to reverse the course, creating special nights at home, watching her favorite movies, making little surprises like flowers for no reason or notes left on the bathroom mirror. But Helena responded with a polite smile, a whispered thank you, as if she were grateful but not touched. This made him feel frustrated, even though he did not verbalize his pain. In moments of solitude, Daniel wondered if he had done something wrong, if he had stopped being the man she fell in love with. But he did not know that what was eating away at Helena was not something he had done, but something that she herself could not understand or name. The couple's circle of friends was small but solid. They had close neighbors with whom they exchanged favors and parents of their children's friends with whom they occasionally went out. At Helena's company, however, the relationships were more complex. The environment was competitive, full of inflated egos and veiled disputes. She knew how to move around there well, earning respect and admiration. One of the most influential names in the company was Victor, her direct boss, a charismatic and experienced man, with a confident posture and discreet magnetism. He noticed Helena with an attention that bordered on care. And although until then their relationship had been purely professional, in the last few months, their looks began to carry a silent subtext, a game of unspoken intentions. Helena, aware of this, did not encourage it, but she did not completely avoid it either. That attention made her feel alive again, desired, seen, sensations she had not experienced in a long time. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his usual routine, unaware that the winds were changing. He spent his days dedicating himself to work and family, believing that stability was a non-negotiable value. He was proud of his upbringing of his children, of the way his home was welcoming, of the respect he had for Helena even on the days when she seemed absent. Sometimes, he would wake up in the middle of the night and find her staring at the ceiling, as if she were far away. He would try to pull her closer, but she would smile and say that everything was fine, just that she was worried about work. He believed her. Because he still believed in her. Time passed, and with it, the small cracks grew. There were no fights, no shouting. Just an increasingly thick silence between the two. Helena seemed tired, but at the same time impatient. Daniel, although he realized that something was falling apart before his eyes, remained firm, hoping that this distance was just a moment, that she would go back to being the way she was before. He was still planning that trip they hadn't been able to take, researching romantic destinations, thinking about leaving the children with their grandmother and surprising her. He held on to hope. And that was what made him resist. Helena, on the other hand, spent more time at the company, saying she was involved in a new demanding project. She arrived later and left earlier. Daniel didn't question her. He trusted her. And this trust was so natural that he didn't even consider the possibility of being betrayed. In his eyes, love was a daily construction, made of loyalty, patience and faith in the other person. He would never have imagined that someone who created a family by his side, with whom he shared so much, could distance himself to the point of not even realizing how much he was still there, waiting for a sign, a gesture, anything that would prove that there was still the two of us. The children, too young to understand what was happening, continued to rejoice in the small joys of everyday life. And that was what hurt Daniel the most, seeing his children growing up in an environment where the love between their parents seemed to weaken without explanation. He tried to fill every space with affection, with games, with presence. But he missed Helena. The woman with whom he shared dreams, plans, and unexpected sweetness. The partner who hugged him for no reason. The woman he chose and with whom he wanted to grow old. It was the beginning of winter when things began to change subtly. Helena was becoming more and more distant. And Daniel, increasingly devoted to trying to save something that was already slipping through his fingers. The routine of the house remained the same, but the warmth that had been in her gestures was no longer there. The clothes tidied up in a hurry, the kiss given in the air when leaving in the morning, the vague excuses about meetings that went on until late, all of this became increasingly present. But Daniel still resisted. Because when you love deeply, it takes a while to accept that the person you are waiting for is no longer there. And it was in this scenario, of apparent routine, of silent attempts, of eyes that no longer meet, that the story took shape. A seemingly ordinary scenario, but full of layers, of silences, of unspoken desires. A scenario where true love fought against apathy, where loyalty was offered in exchange for crumbs, and where, without him knowing it, he was about to witness the turning point of his entire life. But what led Helena to break with everything she had built alongside Daniel? And what did she see when she realized that it might be too late to go back? Autumn arrived silently, bringing with it cloudy days and shorter afternoons, while Daniel continued trying to keep alive a flame that seemed to be slowly fading. The children continued with their innocent laughter, still unaware of the abyss that was opening up between their parents. The routine remained unchanged, but the details, always the details, revealed much more than words could express. Helena had become absent even when she was present. She sat at the table but rarely looked Daniel in the eye. She ran her fingers along the rim of the cup as if searching for an answer, a justification, while he, without knowing it, was no longer competing with another man, but with the emptiness that had settled inside her. The nights they once shared now belonged to separate agendas. Helena claimed to be tired, had commitments, and had last-minute meetings. Daniel, although suspicious, repressed any instinct of suspicion, perhaps out of fear of what he might find if he dug deeper. Sometimes, loving means closing your eyes to what's in front of you, insisting on hope even when your body already knows you've lost it. He preferred to believe it was just a phase, that their connection still existed somewhere, waiting for the right moment to resurface. He continued to leave flowers by her bed, make her coffee with milk exactly the way she liked it, send her sweet messages throughout the day. It wasn't desperation, it was loyalty. It was the reflection of someone who believes in love as a commitment to surrender, even when the other person is no longer there. Helena, on the other hand, was sinking deeper and deeper into an internal conflict that was becoming impossible to ignore. The discreet attentions from Victor, her boss, had gone beyond the limits of casualness and entered the territory of veiled intimacy. The glances exchanged in the hallways, the long conversations after work, the compliments that came loaded with a second layer of meaning, all of this fed something that she believed was dormant inside her. It wasn't just desire. It was the feeling of being seen again. Of being heard, desired, provoked. Victor had the kind of presence that filled the voids with ease, safe, seductive and convenient. It was the opposite of what Helena experienced at home, where everything was predictable and, according to her, lacking in excitement. The first touch was unplanned. It happened after a particularly stressful meeting, when she was alone with him in the presentation room. Victor approached her, complimenting her performance in a voice too low to be just professional. Helena tried to pull away, but she stayed. His hands rested gently on her shoulders and she, without saying anything, accepted the gesture. It didn't end in kisses that afternoon, but it was the beginning of a new atmosphere between them. An atmosphere that expanded and filled all the spaces that had previously belonged to the home she had built with Daniel. In the following days, their encounters became more frequent, more intimate. And even when Helena returned home and lay down next to her husband, she could no longer feel connected to him. Her body was there, but her mind wandered in another direction. And the guilt, although it was there, was muffled by a strange euphoria that urged her to continue. Daniel began to notice even more obvious changes. Helena's clothes became bolder, her perfumes more intense, her absences more frequent. One day, he found a pair of earrings that he didn't recognize, kept in the pocket of her purse. He asked her lightly, almost afraid of the answer. She smiled and said that she had bought them for a special company occasion. He believed her. He wanted to believe her. But his uneasiness grew. One night, while she slept, he watched her face in silence, trying to recognize in her the woman he had fallen in love with. He tried to find some trace of the companion of previous years, but everything seemed covered by a mask that he didn't know how to remove. The children began to feel the tension, even if they didn't understand it. Elisa started asking more questions about where their mother was. Lucas, quieter, got closer to his father, as if he instinctively felt that something was out of place. Daniel tried to maintain normality, to go through his days as if everything was going as it should. But every time he looked at Helena and saw the indifference in her eyes, he felt a dull pain, like a crack slowly spreading inside. It was on a Saturday that the pieces began to fall into place. The day had been busy and, as always, Daniel dedicated himself to organizing everything so that the family evening would be pleasant. He prepared his children's favorite dinner and invited Helena to eat with them. She refused, saying she had a headache and would rather rest. Daniel insisted gently, but was ignored. After putting the children to bed, he walked past the bedroom door and heard his wife talking on the phone, her voice muffled. She spoke softly, used diminutives, and let out a laugh he had not heard in a long time. It pierced his chest like a knife, but he held himself back. He did not go in. He did not ask. He went to the kitchen and sat there, staring at the glass of water for long minutes, his throat dry with anger and sadness. In the days that followed, he began to pay more attention. He began to notice the schedules, the excuses, the messages she wrote in a hurry and hid. He was awake when she said she was going to bed. He was aware when she was late picking up the children. Still, he didn't confront her. Not because he didn't have the courage, but because he wanted certainty. He needed the impact of the truth to react. And she, believing that her actions were going unnoticed, began to expose herself more and more. She became careless, almost disdainful of the family routine. Daniel then began to mentally record every detail, every lie. And, contrary to what is expected of a man about to be betrayed, he didn't scream or cry. He just prepared himself. When the invitation to have dinner with his children arrived, he saw the perfect opportunity. It was Elisa's birthday and he wanted that night to be special for her. He chose his daughter's favorite restaurant, dressed up carefully and kept a smile on his face the whole way there. Helena had said she had a work commitment and couldn't go. Daniel didn't question it. He just went. When he got to the restaurant, he sat down with his children, ordered juice, and started talking about the news at school. And then, when he least expected it, he saw her. It didn't take him more than 2 seconds to recognize her gestures, the way she touched her hair, the forced laugh. Helena was sitting just 2 tables away, with Victor. His hand on hers. Her eyes shining with an excitement he hadn't seen in a long time. Inside, Daniel was broken. But on the outside, he kept his expression. He asked his children to go to the car and hugged them gently. He said he would be back soon. They went, without understanding. And he walked slowly to the table, as if carrying on his shoulders the weight of all the years lived, of all the promises made and broken. He stopped in front of them and spoke with the calmness of someone who expected nothing more. He said that if she didn't want to continue with him, all she had to do was say so. But now, he was the one who didn't want her anymore. And that the divorce letter would arrive soon. Helena turned pale. Victor let go of her hand. The silence between the three of them said more than any explanation. Daniel turned and left without looking back. At that moment, a part of him closed himself off forever. But what he didn't know yet was that betrayal wasn't the only blow he would receive. What was to come would put everything he felt into a new perspective, revealing truths that had been carefully hidden until then. ChatGPT said. The car drove down the road with its headlights sweeping through the dawn, while Daniel kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel and his eyes fixed on the asphalt, but inside, the whirlwind was absolute. The image of Helena with Victor still pulsed in his mind like an open wound, but there was something bigger, something he couldn't name, an uncomfortable premonition that had been growing ever since she had looked at him with that distressed look in the restaurant, as if she were about to beg, but she preferred to swallow it all, as if there was a barrier that not even she knew how to cross anymore. The children were sleeping in the back seat, and he was grateful that they hadn't seen anything, that they still preserved the illusion that their mother was just a woman busy with work. When he got home, he put them both to bed and went down to the living room, sitting on the sofa in silence, with the lights off and his heart numb. The next morning, Helena appeared at the door before the sun had even risen. She was wearing the same dress as the night before and had a shadow of despair in her eyes. She didn't knock. She walked straight in, as if she still felt like she belonged there. She found Daniel in the kitchen, with a cup in his hand and a silence that cut through the air around him. She tried to speak, but he didn't move. He just waited. And when her voice finally broke the ice, it wasn't with excuses, but with a request, that he listened to her for a few minutes, not as a betrayed husband, but as the father of their children, as a man who had heard all her sides. Daniel nodded, without saying a word, but his shallow breathing made it clear that every second there was torture. Helena sat in front of him, her hands clasped together, her body tense, her eyes filled with tears. She said she wouldn't ask for forgiveness, because she knew it wasn't enough. That she wouldn't justify her actions with neediness, with routine, with shallow excuses. That what she did was wrong, weak, cruel. But there was something he needed to know, something he had kept hidden out of fear, shame, because he didn't know how to say it. Daniel narrowed his eyes, trying to decipher if it was just another manipulation, another attempt to dilute the pain with empty words, but he remained silent. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice breaking, about a particular night 4 months earlier when she had an emotional breakdown at the office. She was overwhelmed, confused, caught up in a whirlwind of her own making. Victor had driven her home after seeing her crying in the company bathroom, and on the way he had insisted that she stop for a while, get some air. They went to a quiet restaurant, where they had drinks, and she let herself break down. Between tears and disorderly confessions, she ended up talking about her personal life, about feeling trapped, about her fear of becoming invisible, about feeling worthless as a woman. Victor had listened, understood, touched her face tenderly, and that night, for the first time, they had crossed the line. It was a one-time thing, she said. But that wasn't what had haunted her ever since. What had really consumed her was what happened next. Daniel gripped the cup so tightly that it almost shattered. Her words were spinning around in his head like razors. But when Helena paused for too long, he realized there was still more. Something still unsaid. She then lowered her eyes and, in a whisper, told him that 2 days after that meeting, she had received an email from Elisa's school, informing him about an incident with the girl. She had cried during class, saying that she wanted her mother and father to live together forever. The teacher suspected something and called the parents in for a talk. Helena, still immersed in guilt and denial, went alone and, during the talk, told the principal that she was going through a difficult time at home, trying to regroup emotionally. The principal suggested that Elisa spend a few days with her grandparents, to avoid family stress, and Helena agreed. She called Daniel's mother-in-law and made up a story that she had a bad flu, and that Daniel also had a lot of work. The mother-in-law, worried, took the children in for 5 days in a row. Daniel frowned. He knew that part of the story, but not in such detail. Helena then said that, during that period, she tried to end everything with Victor, to cut off all ties, to regain her sanity. But Victor didn't take it well. He started sending messages, putting emotional pressure on her, throwing the moments they spent in her face. He said he had made a video of them together, without her knowing, and that he would keep it to himself, unless she walked away for good. She felt afraid. Not for herself, but for Daniel, for the children, for the reputation she had always protected. She didn't tell anyone. She tried to act normal, to hide her instability. But the weight of it consumed her day after day. Daniel, now standing, leaning against the counter, felt the thin air. Then she looked at him and said, without blinking, that this was the reason she had kept pretending, even when the affair was over. That the real mistake wasn't just the betrayal, but the silence that came after, and that Victor still had that video. That she tried to get him back, tried to confront him, but didn't have the courage to expose it, not even to herself. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. The blood seemed to vibrate in his ears. The betrayal was already painful in itself, but now there was another level of destruction, the certainty that his children had been taken away, that he had been deceived even after the end of the affair, and that a man who was not even part of their lives held some kind of power over his family. He opened his eyes and, for the first time, spoke. He asked her why she hadn't had the courage to tell him before, why she hadn't trusted him, why she had let things get to this point. Helena cried silently. She said she didn't know who she was anymore, that she was lost, that she hated herself every day for having allowed this to happen. She tried to get closer, to touch his arm, but Daniel backed away. He said that she had destroyed not only their marriage, but the image he had of her as a mother, as a woman, as someone he had trusted his entire life. At that moment, Daniel's cell phone vibrated. It was a message notification. He glanced at it and saw the name of a friend who worked at the data security company. Without understanding, he opened the content and there it was, the video. The same one that Victor had promised not to release. An anonymous email with the file attached and a sentence, "Now everyone knows who she really is." Daniel didn't click. He left the device on the table, looked at Helena and said that, from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. That it didn't matter what she said anymore. That he would respect her as the mother of his children, but that he could no longer look at her the same way. Helena fell to her knees, begging for a chance, saying that she still loved him, that she would do whatever it took to make things right. But Daniel was no longer listening. He was in a place where words no longer reached him. He walked to the children's room, carefully opened the door and looked at the two of them, sleeping peacefully. He closed his eyes and decided there, silently, that they would not grow up amidst lies. He went back to the living room and told Helena that the next day she would receive the divorce papers, that he would have custody, and that she would have the right to visit, but not to dictate the course of that family anymore. She didn't answer. She just cried, silently, realizing that for the first time, her loneliness was real. There were no more excuses, no more justifications. There was only the echo of what she had lost. And the shadow of what was to come. The next day, the sky was covered by thick clouds that made the morning seem like it was coming to an end. The silence in the house was heavier than ever. Helena woke up on the sofa in the living room, her face still damp from the tears that had not stopped during the night. Her body ached, not from any visible injury, but from the unbearable weight of guilt. Her swollen eyes searched in vain for some sign of reversal, some glimmer of hope to cling to, but there was nothing left. Daniel had already left with the children, and in the place where she had once found the warmth of his presence, now only traces remained of someone who had left for good. On the table, 2 envelopes waited, one with the address of a lawyer, the other with a list of documents to be signed. There was no note, no explanation. Just the practical coldness of someone who had nothing more to say. Helena stood there for hours, staring into space, as if it were possible to stop time with her gaze. Every corner of that house was a memory. The door frame still had the mark of the children's height, the magnets on the refrigerator held children's drawings with compliments that she now knew she didn't deserve. She felt like an intruder in her own life. Everything was the same, and yet, she no longer belonged there. There was no longer a place for her within those walls. It was as if she had become an unwanted visitor in the home she had once helped build. The following days passed in a blur. Helena sought shelter at her parents' house, who could not hide their disappointment. Her mother maintained her composure, but her eyes betrayed the sadness of seeing her daughter falling apart in silence. Her father, more direct, said that she had destroyed something rare and that now she would have to live with the consequences. There was no comfort, no acceptance. Only a forced attempt at support, like someone supporting someone who fell off a cliff of their own accord that was always marked. Helena began to live between visits to therapy and legal hearings, trying to maintain some dignity in the face of a situation that she herself had caused. Daniel, on the other hand, remained firm. He took care of his children with a dedication that went beyond what was necessary, as if he wanted to ensure that the pain would not touch them with the same force that had hurt him. He did not avoid talking about his mother, but he did not exalt her either. He responded calmly, avoiding feelings of hurt or idolatry. He wanted his children to grow up with the truth, but without resentment. One afternoon, a few weeks after the video was revealed, Daniel went for a walk in the park with the children. It was a mild Saturday, with mild sunshine and trees swaying gently in the wind. While Lucas ran after Elisa, Daniel sat on a wooden bench and closed his eyes for a few minutes. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the sounds of the park, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a breeze of lightness pass through his chest. That was when a familiar voice, but one he had not heard for a long time, sounded next to him. A woman with wavy hair and a gentle smile greeted him with a hello that was full of memories and sweetness. It was Laura, a college friend he had not seen in years. The reunion was spontaneous, unpretentious, and happened with the naturalness of someone who has written old chapters together. They talked for hours that day, while the children played around them. Laura was divorced and the mother of a 5-year-old boy. She spoke honestly about the pain of the end, but also with gratitude for the rebuilding. She had a light way of looking at life, but it was not superficial. Her words were full of experience and empathy, and Daniel felt understood in a way he had not felt in a long time. There were no promises, no rush. Just a sincere exchange, the kind of connection that starts slowly, like a flame protected from the wind. Over the next few days, they exchanged messages, then coffees. The children hit it off quickly, and without realizing it, the meetings became part of their routine. Daniel, who had previously seen the future as a deserted road, now began to see new paths forming, without guilt, without rushing, but with hope. Meanwhile, Helena was faced with the real emptiness of her choice. Victor had disappeared from the company days after the video began to circulate among employees, leaving no trace, without taking any responsibility. She tried to contact him, tried to understand if he had been the author of the exposure, but received no response. She felt the abandonment, the contempt of someone who was only present when it was convenient. The board of directors removed her from her position claiming the need for restructuring, but she knew that the real reason was the silent scandal that had tarnished her image. Alone, without her husband, without her children, without her job, she began to live in a small rented apartment, with rented furniture and a meaningless routine. She spent her days between appointments with lawyers and unanswered messages from the children. She tried to send gifts, notes, souvenirs, but everything was ignored or returned. Lucas stopped calling her mom in the mandatory video calls. Elisa, in turn, pretended to be busy or simply did not show up. It was as if her presence caused discomfort even from a distance. One night, she decided to go to the children's school without warning. She waited outside, watching from afar. She saw Daniel arrive with the two of them, saw the smiles, the hugs, the lightness that had once been hers. And then, she saw Laura approaching. She brought a snack for Elisa, who ran to her with a sparkle in her eyes. Laura bent down, gently fixed the girl's hair and handed her the lunchbox. Then, she exchanged a few words with Daniel and said goodbye. Helena remained hidden, feeling every gesture like a dagger. There, before her eyes, was the family she had destroyed, rebuilt without her. She felt exiled. There was no place for her in that scene. That was the portrait of her failure, living proof that love does not die, it only transforms and goes in another direction. Days later, during a new hearing to define the terms of custody, Helena entered the courtroom thinner, paler, with sunken eyes. She tried, for the last time, to argue that she was changing, that she wanted to regain her children's trust, that she could still be a good mother. The judge listened to her, but Daniel's lawyer presented overwhelming evidence of the unstable environment she had created. Photos of the video were never shown, by express decision of Daniel, who preferred to keep his children safe from public humiliation. The judge decided to maintain full custody with the father, granting supervised visits every 15 days, only if the children so desired. Helena just nodded, without the strength to protest. She knew she had already lost. As she left the courtroom, she passed Daniel in the hallway. He looked her in the eyes, without anger, only with the cold compassion of someone who no longer feels anything but pity. She tried to say something, but he only replied that he hoped that one day she would find peace. And he moved on. That night, back at the apartment, Helena sat on the living room floor with the photo album spread out around her. He looked at each image as if he were leafing through another woman's story. She smiled next to Daniel, next to her children, next to the life she had thrown away. She cried until she couldn't hold back any more, and fell asleep right there, with an old photo of Elisa in her hands. On the other side of the city, Daniel walked alongside Laura and the children through a night market. The colorful lights reflected on their smiling faces, and there was an air of new beginnings in the air. Laura held his hand lightly, as if she was in no hurry but knew exactly where she was. Lucas asked for cotton candy, Elisa climbed on her father's shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt at home again. It wasn't the home he had dreamed of years ago, but it was the home that was born of truth, of overcoming obstacles, and of the love that withstood the ashes. The past could not be erased. But now, it was just that, the past. Helena, with her loneliness, faced the consequences of each choice. Daniel, with his serenity, built a new life where there was room for healing, love and a new beginning. And the children, still young but already wise, learned from the strongest example they could have, that true love knows when it is time to move on. Winter had finally given way to spring, and with it, the city seemed to breathe differently. The flowering trees filled the streets with soft tones, the days grew longer, and the evenings took on golden hues that seemed to suit the souls of anyone willing to notice. Daniel walked in silence beside Laura, watching Elisa and Lucas playing in the distance. It was impressive how the children, even after so much, had adapted more easily than he had imagined. Perhaps out of natural protection, perhaps because they knew, deep down, that true love had remained with them all along. Laura had become more than a constant presence. She was the calm in their eyes, the sincere conversation at the end of the day, the gentle touch that required no justification. But Daniel had not yet told her he loved her. Not out of doubt, but out of respect for what they were building. He was still healing invisible wounds, still learning to trust his own feelings, and he did not want any words to be hasty. He preferred to let time stitch everything together, with patience, with truth. Meanwhile, Helena continued her silent and increasingly introspective routine. The small apartment seemed to shrink with each passing day. The empty bed, the lonely dishes, the echo of her own footsteps on the cold tiles of the hallway. She had stopped texting her children a few weeks ago, after realizing that the silence on the other side was more painful than her own absence. The patient psychologist tried to encourage her to keep trying, but Helena was beginning to accept that there are things that cannot be regained with persistence. In an attempt to find meaning, she began to attend a shelter for women in emotional crisis. She didn't talk about herself, she listened. She just listened. Stories of loss, of rebuilding, of irreparable mistakes. Those broken voices echoed in her like a kind of distorted mirror, and, curiously, they brought her some relief. It was as if, by realizing the pain of others, she could forgive herself a little more. She still didn't know how to be a better version of herself, but she knew exactly who she didn't want to be anymore. Daniel, in turn, now faced a new dilemma. As time passed and his feelings for Laura grew deeper, he found himself torn between maintaining the careful pace he had adopted or allowing himself to truly love again. It was no longer just the woman who enchanted him, but the way she looked at her children, how she respected their space, how she made herself present without trying to take a place that was not hers. Lucas, one weekend, had referred to her as our special friend, and Elisa spent hours drawing the four of them holding hands like a new family. It moved him, but it also made him reflect. Was he being fair to everyone by starting a new chapter, even though the previous one had ended so abruptly? Was he ready to open his heart again without fear of seeing it crushed like the last time? One night, while he was preparing dinner and Laura was helping Elisa with her homework, Daniel watched the scene and felt a different warmth in his chest. There was a silent, almost imperceptible peace there, which contrasted with the chaos of months before. He remembered a phrase he had heard in therapy: not every new beginning is a scream. Sometimes, it's just the silence that stops hurting. And in that moment, he knew. He put the pan aside, walked over to Laura, and with teary eyes, whispered in her ear that he was ready. That, even though he was still learning to heal completely, he no longer wanted to live in expectation. He wanted to live by her side, and if she wanted to, they could start, slowly but truly, a new story. Laura just smiled and held his hand. They didn't need grandiose declarations. They just wanted to be there, and that was all. The following week, Helena received a letter. Handwritten, in Elisa's careful handwriting. There was no forgiveness, but there was affection. The girl said she still missed her mother from before, but she didn't know if that mother still existed. That she didn't understand everything that had happened, but that her heart still missed her, even though she didn't know if she wanted to go back. Helena cried as she read each line. She didn't reply. She knew she couldn't speed up her children's time, or demand feelings that needed to be born on their own. But that piece of paper, with her daughter's crooked and sincere lines, was like a ray of sunlight in a window that had been closed for a long time. She folded the letter delicately and put it away in a box of memories that she had been organizing with great effort. Not with the intention of reliving, but of learning. On a long weekend, Daniel traveled with Laura and the children to a small inn in the countryside. The days were peaceful, filled with laughter and simple moments. On the last day, during breakfast, Elisa asked if they could take another family photo. A spontaneous gesture, full of acceptance. Daniel took a deep breath, looked at Laura and saw the same emotional surprise in her. It was as if, for the first time, everything had fallen into place. The pain was still there, but now it was part of history and no longer part of the present. Lucas, more reserved, just nodded and approached for the portrait. In that click, more than one image was captured. The beginning of a new narrative was recorded, where there was no room for betrayal, only for reconstruction. A few days later, Daniel ran into Helena by chance in front of a bookstore. She was different. Thinner, yes, but with a less lost look in her eyes. They greeted each other with a restrained nod, and she approached. She asked about her children, her work, her life. Daniel answered calmly, without going into details, but without being cold. She then, without waiting too long, said that she was undergoing treatment, that she had started giving lectures on how impulsive decisions can cost entire lives. That she didn't know if she would ever be able to forgive herself, but that she now understood the gravity of everything. She apologized again, not out of habit, but because she felt she still owed that conversation. Daniel thanked her. He said that he truly hoped she could find a place of peace. That her children were fine, and that perhaps, with time, they could get back together in a healthy way, if that was what they wanted. She nodded, without insisting. She understood that there was nothing more to be rebuilt between them. What remained now was only mutual respect for having shared part of their lives and created together what was most valuable. Helena's dilemma was profound. She knew that the forgiveness she wanted might never come, that the children's eyes might remain distant for a long time. But at the same time, she understood that her punishment was already being served. Not by external imposition, but by everything she felt when waking up every day without the touch of her children, without the drawing stuck on the fridge, without the smell of the coffee that Daniel prepared on Sundays. Her life was now made of silence, of learning and of a solitude that she herself sewed together stitch by stitch. And even recognizing her guilt, she understood that redemption was not a right. It was something that might come, or might not. But even without knowing what the future would bring her, she had decided to continue living, even if it was only to teach other women not to cross the lines that she had crossed. Daniel, on the other hand, felt more and more whole. Not immune to the pain, but strengthened by it. He knew it wasn't easy to rebuild oneself after such a profound breakdown. He knew it wasn't easy to trust again, to love again, but there was something about Laura that made him believe. Not in eternal promises, but in the possibility of being happy, of building something new with awareness, with clear limits, with love that doesn't suffocate. The children grew up, and with them, he also learned. Every loving gesture from Lucas, every spontaneous laugh from Elisa, was a reminder that he did the right thing. That protecting his children wasn't just a practical decision, but an act of courage. Over time, Helena's steps became less heavy. She no longer cried every night, and she began to take up old hobbies again. She painted, read, and wrote letters that she never sent. She spent her afternoons in silence, no longer as punishment, but as contemplation. The emptiness that had once screamed was now a space to reorganize herself. She knew that, contrary to what many say, time does not heal everything. But it teaches. It teaches you to respect your own limits, to measure your words, to recognize signs. It teaches you to accept that certain wounds do not heal completely, but they do stop bleeding. On the other side of the city, in that house that was no longer the same, but that continued to be the home of a new story, Daniel watched the plants in the garden bloom with the same calm with which love blooms after pain. And there, in that seemingly ordinary setting, there was a rare feeling, that of well-deserved peace. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled. Now, it was the present that guided life. And he knew, with all certainty, that what was to come still held more than new beginnings. It held answers. And, perhaps, one last surprise. That same week, after the unexpected encounter with Helena in front of the bookstore, Daniel began to feel even more aware of his choices, but also more touched by the delicacies of time. When he got home that night, he noticed Laura sitting on the couch with a blanket around her legs and a book in her hands. The children had been asleep for hours, and the atmosphere was filled with a serene, almost sacred silence. He watched her for a few seconds before sitting down next to her, without saying anything. It was in those small moments that he understood that peace did not come from great changes, but from the simplicity of sincere presence. Laura looked up and smiled, as if she knew that, at that moment, his mind was wandering between the past and the present. Daniel held her hand and, for the first time, spoke in a firm, calm voice that felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he should be. Laura said nothing right away. She just squeezed his hand and rested her head on his shoulder. And there, in that silence full of meaning, a new certainty took hold. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed that Elisa seemed more reflective and reserved. She spent more time drawing alone and writing in a notebook that she kept under her pillow. He respected her space, but one night, when he was putting the children to bed, he sat down on the edge of the girl's bed and asked if there was anything she wanted to say. Elisa was silent for a while, biting her lower lip, and then said in a very low voice that she missed her mother, but not the person her mother had become, but the one who made pancakes on Sunday mornings, the one who braided her hair before school performances, the one who sang off-key in the car and laughed along with her. Daniel listened attentively and replied that understanding that was a sign of maturity and that she didn't need to feel guilty for missing someone who also caused her pain. Elisa asked if her mother could change. Daniel said that people could change, but that they didn't always change in the time or in the way we expected. The girl nodded and lay down on her side. He covered her affectionately and kissed her forehead. He knew that words didn't cure everything, but they served as a relief to the thorns inside. Meanwhile, Helena was going through a slow process of reconstruction. She continued with her therapy sessions, now less frequently, because she was able to name her feelings without needing someone to lead her by the hand each time. She started working in a small local bookstore, taking care of the children's section, organizing reading workshops and creating fun activities. This new routine did not redeem her from what she had done, but it gave her a new chance to be in touch with innocence, with the beauty of pure beginnings. It was painful to be among children when her own avoided contact, but it was also, in a way, therapeutic. In that simplicity, she felt she could rediscover parts of herself that she believed were lost. A long weekend brought the proposal of a longer trip. Laura suggested taking the children to her sister's country house, in a mountainous region surrounded by trails and rivers. Daniel hesitated for a moment, fearful of the intensity of that family immersion, but when he saw Elisa and Lucas' enthusiasm, he accepted. The trip was marked by unique moments. Fires in the fireplace, stories shared under the stars, simple meals that seemed like banquets because they laughed so much together. One night, after the children went to bed, Daniel was walking with Laura through the backyard when she suddenly stopped and said that, although she didn't want to pressure him, she felt she needed to tell him that she loved him. She said it simply, directly, without dramatization. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but not with pain. It was something else. It was the realization that those words, spoken with such honesty, were like a seal on everything they had built. He responded with shining eyes, saying that he loved her too, but that he was still afraid, not of her, but of himself. Laura smiled and said that love does not require haste, that fear can also walk alongside it, as long as the truth is never lost. And in that exchange of vulnerabilities, they remained there, in silence, between the sound of the leaves swaying and the echo of the past that was finally beginning to disappear. On the other side of the city, Helena was making a routine visit to the center where she now worked as a volunteer. When she got there, she found an envelope addressed to her, left anonymously by one of the mothers in the community who had been helped by her work. Inside was a thank you note and a drawing made by a child, showing her smiling next to little hearts. That made her cry with an intensity she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was recognition. It was proof that, despite everything, she could still bring something good to the world. And even if she never got back what she lost, she could become a better person for whatever came next. The following week, Helena found out that Elisa had participated in a small school play and that Laura and Daniel had been there, along with Lucas. I found out because one of the mothers posted a photo of the event on social media. She watched her daughter's face for long minutes, the way she smiled on stage, and even from the distance of the camera, she recognized a trace of herself there. That hurt more than I expected, but it also brought peace. Because, despite everything, her daughter seemed fine, she seemed whole. And that, deep down, was what mattered most. A few days later, Helena sent Daniel an unsigned envelope. Inside, there was only a letter. It didn't beg for anything, it didn't ask for visits or dates. It was a confession. He said that he now understood that the greatest damage was not what he had caused to the marriage, but to the children's childhood. That for years he had seen himself as a victim of a cold routine, of a marriage in crisis, but that today he saw that he had never tried to rekindle things, he had just waited for it to end and then pushed it to happen. That she had rediscovered herself not as the woman she had been, but as a new woman, with fewer illusions, more awareness. That she wanted him to know that she was taking care of her own soul, not to win him back, but because she could no longer bear living in ruins. Daniel read it all in silence. He didn't answer. But he kept the letter in a locked drawer, not out of attachment, but as a symbol of a cycle that, although full of pain, was now ending in a dignified way. Time continued to march on with its relentless calm. The seasons changed again, and with them, the realization that nothing is permanent, except the way we choose to face what we experience. Daniel and Laura's life went on, now with new projects, short trips, plans that arose naturally. Elisa and Lucas spent more time with their new family, without it being forced. It was simply a consequence of affection, trust, and stability. Helena, on a certain Saturday, received a message from an unknown number. It was from Elisa. Short, to the point, "Hi, Mom. Can we talk sometime?" That made her collapse. For the first time, the silence had been broken. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was openness. It was a half-open window in the middle of a wall that she thought was insurmountable. And so, between the comings and goings of emotions, between fears and new beginnings, between silences and unspoken forgiveness, everyone gradually found their new place. Because love, even when betrayed, even when torn apart, does not cease to exist. It just changes form. It transforms into care, into choice, into respect, and sometimes it is reborn in a way that no one expects. But it is always there, in the midst of chaos and the unexpected, that life shows its most surprising capacity, to continue. Time passed like a thin line between what was and what would never be again. A year had passed since the last time Helena had crossed Daniel's path, and in that time, profound changes had occurred almost silently, as if life itself had decided to work in the shadows to weave destinies in a way that no one could foresee. The small apartment where she lived was now cleaner, more organized, but it still carried the same smell of absence. The walls, previously white and cold, now had warm and discreet tones, like a subtle attempt to warm up the lonely days. Helena, unlike the broken woman who had arrived there months ago, was now a serene figure, with restrained steps and a firmer gaze. There was no arrogance, nor denial, only a bitter and solemn acceptance of everything that had been lost. Her job at the bookstore had become an extension of her home, a space where she could breathe more easily and exchange sincere words with children who, in a way, helped to silence the lament that still echoed deep within her soul. She still dreamed of her children some nights. On other nights, she woke up scared because she couldn't remember their voices. She kept the old drawings as relics and read, almost as a ritual, the letter written by Elisa so many times that she knew every curve of the shaky handwriting by heart. On the other side of the city, life flourished in a way that was as natural as it was inevitable. Daniel had married Laura in an intimate ceremony, surrounded only by their children and a few friends. There was no ostentation, no long speeches, just genuine vows exchanged under a leafy tree, with the sound of the wind as their witness. Elisa and Lucas participated in the moment spontaneously, happy and welcomed, as if they had always belonged to that family. The house where they now lived was spacious, with a backyard where Laura grew herbs and flowers and where Daniel had built, with his own hands, a small greenhouse for Lucas's schoolwork. Elisa was given a new room with an entire wall reserved for her drawings and a painting easel in the corner, which she used as a kind of illustrated diary. There was peace in that house, a peace that did not come from the absence of conflict, but from the firm presence of love built with patience, dedication, and respect. One ordinary afternoon, during a meeting at Elisa's school, Daniel was surprised by Helena's presence. She had been invited by her own daughter to watch a special end-of-semester performance. The girl, although still cautious, had begun a slow and spontaneous process of rapprochement, without pressure. Daniel, upon seeing her, simply nodded. There were no words exchanged at that moment, just brief glances that said much more than any rehearsed phrase. Helena kept her distance, sat in the back row and watched her daughter on stage with her eyes full of tears, but a restrained smile on her lips. That was the closest thing to redemption she could achieve, seeing her daughter grow up well, safe, happy, even without her by her side every day. After the presentation, Elisa approached her mother and hugged her lightly. There was no euphoria, nor was there any distance. It was a gesture of someone who is learning to heal and allowing herself to take small steps. Helena asked for nothing. She did not beg for visits, did not demand time, did not demand feelings. She simply said that she was there, whenever her daughter wanted, and that was enough. Elisa nodded and returned to Daniel and Laura, who were waiting for her lovingly. Helena watched the trio walk away and, for the first time, felt something other than pain. She felt peace. A bittersweet peace, it is true, but true. She knew that she had failed, that she had lost the chance to be an active part of that story, but she also knew that she had contributed, even if involuntarily, to the strength that existed today in that new family unit. Sometimes, the pain we cause others teaches us more about who we are than any victory. A few months later, Helena was invited to give a talk at a local university about personal reconstruction after major failures. She told her story with brutal honesty, without seeking self-pity. She spoke about the betrayal, the emotional breakdown, the separation from her children, the loss of her marriage, and how all of this had led her to emotional rock bottom. But she also spoke about the slow and painful steps of rebuilding, of facing herself, of choosing not to hide behind excuses. The audience, initially uncomfortable, listened when they realized that there was no show there, just a raw testimony of someone who had destroyed everything and still decided not to remain in ruin. After the talk, she received dozens of hugs, questions, and thanks. It wasn't redemption. But it was a beginning. And she knew that some beginnings were worth more than any forgiveness. In their new home, Daniel, Laura and the children continued their routine. Elisa started writing, inspired by her own story. She created short children's chronicles that sensitively addressed topics such as forgiveness, loss and change. Laura encouraged her, read each one and commented gently. Lucas, in turn, showed a talent for solving problems and taking toys apart, which led to the creation of a small space in the backyard where he would assemble his inventions with his father. Daniel, between his professional life and family commitments, remained attentive to his children's emotional needs. He knew that even peace needs to be carefully maintained. And Laura's presence, solid and sensitive, was a foundation on this journey. One night, sitting next to Elisa, who was writing yet another one of her stories, Daniel asked her how she felt about everything that had happened. The girl thought for a few seconds and said that she thought that sometimes good people did bad things, and that we don't always have to forget what hurt, but that it was possible to choose to remember without bleeding. Daniel smiled with teary eyes. He now understood that the pain had not destroyed them, but transformed them. And that every tear, every silence, every separation, had led them there, a place of love, reconstruction, and choice. Not the idealized kind, but the possible kind. The truest kind. If you've made it this far, leave your opinion about this story in the comments. What would you do in each character's shoes? Which part touched you the most? We'd love to hear what you think. And of course, if you like this type of story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow new exciting plots like this one. This story shows us, with all possible intensity, that betrayal does not only destroy relationships. It erodes memories, disfigures bonds, and breaks the security that takes years to build. Love can survive pain, but it will never emerge unscathed from lies. Every choice has a price, and often, that price is the loss of what we loved most without realizing it. Cheating is not just a momentary act, it is an emotional earthquake whose aftershocks last forever. Here on the channel, we make it clear, we do not support, do not justify, and never romanticize any form of betrayal. Because those who love, care. Those who love, protect. Those who love, choose every day to stay, even in the storms. And when that choice fails, what is broken is much more than a heart. It is the soul of an entire family.